The crystal chandelier above the table threw 1,000 tiny rainbows across the pristine white tablecloth, each one a shimmering lie. It was a beautiful scene, the kind you see in magazines. A perfect Christmas dinner. The air was thick with the scent of roasted goose and pine, undercut by the expensive oaky aroma of a Bordeaux that probably cost more than my first car. My son Mark was holding court, his voice a confident, booming instrument that filled the spacious dining room. He was in his element, dressed in a suit so sharp it looked like it could cut the tension he was so carefully ignoring. He was recounting, for what felt like the third time, the details of his latest triumph. And the beauty of it, he was saying, gesturing with his wineglass, was the leverage. They never saw it coming. A $12 million deal, structured so perfectly, was practically a work of art. He took a satisfied sip, his eyes scanning the room as if an invisible audience was applauding. His wife, Elena, sat beside him. She was a vision in emerald green, elegant and composed, but her eyes, the color of a soft twilight, were fixed on the intricate pattern of her gold-rimmed plate. There was a stillness to her, a profound sadness she carried with her like a secret. She was here, but she wasn't here. I sat opposite them, a simple man in a simple wool sweater, feeling like a ghost at my own son's feast. My hands resting on the table were rough from a morning spent in the garden tending to my winter vegetables. They were honest hands. They felt out of place next to the polished silver and the delicate china. Mark's gaze, warm and self-congratulatory, finally swung toward me. The focus of the room shifted with it. The spotlight was now harsh and unforgiving. "So, Dad," he began, his tone dipping into a familiar, condescending register he reserved just for me. A smile played on his lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. Those were cold, assessing. "Listening to all this must seem a world away from your quiet life. All this talk of mergers and acquisitions." He leaned forward slightly, the expensive fabric of his suit jacket straining. "It got me thinking, really thinking. And what have you accomplished lately?" The question hung in the air, not as a genuine inquiry, but as a setup, a predator circling its prey. "You just sit in that old house," he continued, the smile widening into a smirk, "watering your plants, reading your books, waiting." He let the word waiting dangle, imbuing it with all the emptiness he believed my life contained. Then he delivered the blow. He said it with a light, almost jovial laugh, as if it were a harmless joke between father and son. But the venom was so clear, so potent, it seemed to curdle the very air in the room. "You're useless." He paused, letting the word land, sink in, do its damage. "The most useless old man in the world." Silence. It was a physical force. That silence. It swallowed the clinking of cutlery, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of car carolers from down the street. It was a vacuum, and in its center was that word, useless. My eyes moved from his smug, triumphant face. I saw Elena flinch as if she'd been struck. Her gaze remained locked on her plate, her shoulders curling inward with a shame that was meant for me, a protective, empathetic horror that made my heart ache for her. She was ashamed for me, mortified by her husband's cruelty. A single perfect curl had escaped her updo and rested against her pale neck, a tiny testament to her humanity in this brutal moment. I did not look at her for long. I did not want to give him the satisfaction of seeing me seek comfort or solidarity. My gaze drifted downward to my own place setting, to my half-empty glass of wine. The deep red liquid was perfectly still, a dark pool reflecting the distorted, upside-down image of the glittering chandelier above. I watched the light play in that wine for a long moment. I watched it the way a man watches a river, with a deep, abiding patience. I felt the weight of my son's stare, waiting for a reaction. anger, hurt, humiliation, anything that would justify his cruelty and confirm his superiority. But I gave him nothing. Outwardly, I was a statue. My breathing remained even. My hands did not tremble. My face was a mask of calm neutrality. Inside, it was not anger that bloomed, but something colder, clearer. It was the click of a final piece falling into place, a confirmation of a truth I had been quietly observing for years. This wasn't a momentary lapse in judgment. This was the core of him. This was the man my son had chosen to become. So I simply sat there, in the lavish dining room, amidst the ruins of a family Christmas, and I observed. I absorbed the insult. I filed it away, and I did not react. The silence in my house isn't empty. People mistake it for loneliness, but it's something I cultivated over decades. When you live alone in a house for 20 years, every sound becomes familiar. The way the floorboards creak in the hallway around 3 in the afternoon when the sun hits them just right. The particular hum of the refrigerator that means it's working too hard. The soft rustle of the oak leaves outside my bedroom window during a light rain. These aren't noises that bother me. They're part of the landscape, like the topography of a country I know intimately. My days follow a rhythm that would probably put most people to sleep, and that's precisely the point. I wake with the sun. I make my coffee, black, 1 spoon of sugar, the same way for 40 years, and I take it out to the garden. The garden is my masterpiece of mundanity. Neat rows of tomatoes, basil that smells like summer itself, peppers that turn from green to a fiery red. To my son, it's the hobby of a simple man with too much time on his hands. He once told his friends I was puttering around, like some retired mechanic tinkering with a broken lawnmower. He never understood that every plant I place in the earth, every weed I pull, is part of a deeper discipline. It's about understanding systems, about patience, about knowing that some things need to be nurtured in silence before they reveal their strength. The world sees a retired man who had a modest career as a mid-level financial clerk. They see the simple clothes, the old car that still runs perfectly, the lack of interest in new gadgets or fancy vacations. They see a nobody, and I have worked very hard my entire life to make sure that's exactly what they see. What they mistake for simplicity is actually compression. All that I am, all that I've ever been, has been folded down into this quiet, unassuming shape. It's the most effective camouflage there is. There's a locked chest in my attic. It's an old steel-banded thing that sits under a layer of dust next to Christmas decorations I haven't used in a decade. My son has seen it. He asked about it once, years ago. I told him it was full of old tax documents and my late wife's letters. He never asked again. He's never been a curious boy. He only ever sees the value in things that shine immediately. He doesn't understand that the most powerful things in the world are often kept in the dark, in silence, gathering potential. I go up there sometimes, not to open it, but just to be near it, to remember the weight of what's inside. It's a grounding force, a reminder that the man people see when they look at me is a choice, not a default. This calm I carry, the one my son mistakes for docility, for a lack of fire, is not weakness. It is a predator's stillness. I learned a long time ago that the noisiest person in the room is usually the most vulnerable. They're telegraphing their moves, expending energy, revealing their insecurities. Silence is a tool. Observation is a weapon. When you say nothing, people project everything onto you. They fill the silence with their own assumptions, their own stories, and in doing so, they give you the blueprint to their entire psyche. I've spent a lifetime reading those blueprints. My son's is a simple one. It screams of a gaping, bottomless need for validation, a hunger so vast it can never be filled. His bluster, his boasts, his sharp suits, and his multi-million-dollar deals, they're all just sandbags against a rising tide of inadequacy. The only person who ever seemed to look past the caricature of the quiet old man is Elena. She's the only one who ever brought me tea without being asked, who sat with me on the porch and talked about things that mattered. Books she was reading, a documentary she'd seen about the migration of monarch butterflies, her quiet hope for a future that felt less like a gilded cage. She never spoke to me with the condescending pity the others used. She spoke to me like a human being. There was a kindness in her eyes that wasn't performative. It was a genuine light, one that was slowly being dimmed by my son's constant, crushing presence. In a world of noise, her quiet kindness was the only real conversation I'd had in years. It was a signal in the static, and I have always been an expert at listening for signals. The silence after that Christmas dinner stretched into days, then weeks, but it wasn't the peaceful quiet I was used to. It was a heavy, waiting silence, thick with the unspoken poison my son had left hanging in the air. And Mark, true to his nature, couldn't let the silence stand. He had to fill it, not with apologies or reflection, but with a series of calculated moves that felt less like interactions and more like a campaign. It started with the phone. He showed up at my house unannounced, the way he always did, letting himself in as if the place were already his. He held up a small, flimsy cardboard box. "Got you something, Dad," he said, his voice dripping with a patronizing cheer I knew all too well. He placed it on the kitchen table between us. It was one of those prepaid cell phones, the kind you buy at a grocery store. "I know you're stubborn about technology," he continued, not even waiting for me to open it. "But it's time. This way Elena and I can finally get a hold of you. It's for your own safety. You can't just be sitting out here all alone with no way for anyone to check on you." He said, "check on you," but I heard monitor you. I heard control you. I looked at the cheap plastic device, a symbol of his perceived superiority. He wasn't giving me a tool for connection. He was issuing a mandate for compliance. He saw my quiet life, my choice to live simply, as a problem he needed to solve. An inconvenience to his narrative. I simply nodded, my face a placid mask. "That's thoughtful of you, Mark." The lie was ash in my mouth. He beamed, mistaking my stillness for docility, for gratitude. He never considered it might be analysis. The phone was just the opening gambit. The next move was more direct, more brutal. He began talking about my house, my home for over 30 years, the place where I'd raised him, the walls that held a lifetime of memories, both light and dark. To him it was just square footage. We were in the living room, and he was pacing, talking at me, not to me. "You know, Dad, this place is an underutilized asset. It's a lot for one man to manage. The yard work, the upkeep. There's a fantastic new retirement community being built on the west side. Full amenities, a pool, activities, people your own age. We could get you in there, no problem. Free up this place, let it be an actual productive investment." He spoke as if it were a done deal, as if my life, my sanctuary, were a corporate asset to be reallocated for maximum profit. He was making these decisions in front of me, for me, stripping me of my agency as casually as if he were discarding old newspapers. I said nothing. I just watched him, absorbing the shape of his ambition, the sheer, unadulterated greed that had curdled whatever good might have once been in him. He saw my home not as a home, but as a piece on a financial chessboard, and he was ready to sacrifice the king, me, to win a game I wasn't even playing. But as his campaign against me intensified, I started to see the other front in his war. Elena. I began to notice it in the small things, the way you notice a shift in the light before a storm. We'd be at one of his obligatory dinners, and he would turn to her in the middle of a story and say, "No, Elena, that's not how it happened. You never get the details right." He'd say it with a laugh, a performative chuckle for his guests. But his eyes were hard, cold, He'd dismiss her opinion on anything of substance, politics, art, even the wine she had chosen for the evening. "Let the adults talk, sweetheart," he'd say, patting her hand as if she were a child. She began to shrink. The elegant, intelligent woman I'd seen at Christmas dinner was slowly fading, being painted over with a dull, compliant grey. She became a ghost in her own home, moving from room to room without making a sound, her eyes perpetually downcast. She was a beautiful accessory for his arm, but he treated her like a faulty appliance, something to be criticized, managed and controlled. I saw the same pattern he used on me, the condescension, the dismissal, the relentless erosion of a person's sense of self. He was trying to convince us both that we were useless, that our only value was what he assigned to us. And the source of all this bluster, the multi-million-dollar deal he had boasted about, the truth of it began to seep out, not from him, of course, but from the cracks in his facade. A hushed phone call I overheard, his voice a low, threatening growl. A fragment of a conversation with a business partner where he used words like leverage and non-negotiable terms. It wasn't a brilliant business maneuver. It was a shakedown. He had strong-armed, smaller, vulnerable partners, using his financial weight and sheer aggression to squeeze them out of their fair share or force them into ruinous agreements. He wasn't building an empire. He was building a house of cards on a foundation of other people's despair. Watching him, watching her, a cold, hard clarity settled over me. This wasn't just about a son disrespecting his father. This was the unmasking of a tyrant in a tailored suit. The insults to me were one thing, a personal cruelty I could bear. But seeing that same venom directed at Elena, seeing him systematically dismantle the light in her eyes, that was different. That was a declaration of war not just on me, but on basic human decency itself. And I knew with a certainty that felt as old as the bones in my body, that tyrants, no matter how well dressed, always fall. They just need the right push. The noise was a physical presence in that penthouse, a thick, shimmering blanket of self-congratulation and forced laughter. Champagne flutes clinked like tiny, fragile alarms. Mark was at the center of it all, his face flushed with alcohol and victory, holding court. I was a statue in the corner, a piece of the scenery he'd paid for, observing. I'd spent a lifetime observing. It's a skill you never lose, like a language learned in a forgotten country. You watch the micro-expressions, the slight tightening around the eyes, the way a person holds their glass just a little too tightly. I saw Elena moving through the crowd, a beautiful ghost in a sea of sharks. She was performing her part, smiling, nodding, but her eyes were vacant, like windows to an empty house. She'd been like that more and more, the light inside her dimming by degrees. I'd seen her earlier, having a brief, polite conversation with a man I recognized, a competitor of Mark's, a decent sort who'd built his business without stepping on necks. It was nothing, a social nicety. But Mark had seen it too. I watched as he detached himself from his sycophants, his movements a little too deliberate, the alcohol making him clumsy in his arrogance. He cut through the crowd, a shark sensing what he thought was blood in the water, and took Elena firmly by the elbow. He didn't ask. He took. He guided her, not gently, toward a quieter corridor that led to the bedrooms. He thought they were out of sight, out of earshot. But the acoustics in these modern glass and steel boxes are funny. Sound travels in unexpected ways, catching on hard surfaces and funneling down hallways. And I have always had very good ears. I didn't move from my spot. I simply turned my head a fraction, my gaze fixed on a mere meaningless, abstract painting on the far wall, and I listened. His voice was a low, venomous hiss, stripped of its public charm. What the hell was that, Elena? What, Mark? Her voice was small, tired. Don't play stupid with me. Chatting up Henderson? Smiling at him like that? You think I didn't see you? You're undermining me. In my own home, I was just being polite. He was polite to me. I don't pay you to be polite to my rivals. He spat, and the words were like a physical blow. I could almost feel her flinch from across the room. I pay for you to stand there and look good. To be an accessory. That's it. Do you understand your function? There was a silence then, a terrible hollow silence, where I could imagine her just staring at him, all the words she wanted to say dying before they reached her lips. And then he said it. The words that changed everything. They weren't shouted. They were delivered with a cold, final clarity that was worse than any rage. You're as useless as my father. He let that hang in the air, letting the comparison, the insult, sink in. Just a pretty face for my arm. Remember who pays for that face? That was the moment. The click. It wasn't the insult to me. I had absorbed a lifetime of his disdain. My skin was leather tough against it. Number. It was what happened to her. From my vantage point, I saw her profile. I saw the last flicker of light in her eyes, that final desperate ember of hope, of self, just die. It wasn't a slow dimming this time, it was an extinguishing. A switch being thrown. Her shoulders, which she always held so perfectly poised, slumped in a way that had nothing to do with posture and everything to do with utter surrender. Her face didn't crumple into tears, it just went blank, empty. A beautiful, lifeless mask. In that single crystallized second, I saw the absolute parallel. I saw the complete dehumanization. He didn't see a wife, he didn't see a father, he saw property. Assets to be managed, used and discarded when they no longer served his purpose. We were both just objects in his world, items on his balance sheet. His comment about paying for her face. It was the same mentality with which he talked about my house being an underutilized asset. We were not people, we were things, and that was the trigger. A cold, terrifying calm settled over me, a feeling I hadn't experienced in decades. It was the calm of a predator that has finally identified its prey, not out of hunger, but out of necessity. The quiet in my soul was no longer the quiet of retirement or patience. It was the silence of a weapon being loaded. The party noise faded into a dull, meaningless roar. The faces around me blurred. All I could see was that corridor, the two figures, and the profound, unforgivable transgression that had just occurred. The game was over. The war had just begun, and he didn't even know he was on the battlefield. The silence in my house that night wasn't empty. It was heavy, thick with the ghost of my son's words and the dead light in his wife's eyes. The drive home had been a blur. I hadn't turned on the radio. I hadn't needed to. The echo of his voice was enough. You're as useless as my father. He hadn't just insulted her. He had drawn a line, connecting us as two pieces of his property, two assets he believed had depreciated beyond any value. I didn't go to bed. Sleep was for men whose wars were over. Mine, it seemed, was just beginning. I climbed the pull-down stairs to the attic, the wood groaning under my weight, a sound I usually associated with the slow settling of a quiet life. But there was nothing quiet about the purpose in my steps now. The air was cold and smelled of dust and old paper. In the far corner, under a faded canvas drop cloth, was the chest. It was an unremarkable thing, a heavy, reinforced metal box I bought from an army surplus store 40 years ago. To anyone else, it would look like it held Christmas decorations or old photo albums, the sentimental detritus of a simple man. The key was not on my keyring. It was on a separate, unmarked fob, tucked away in a small box in my closet. The lock turned with a solid, satisfying clunk that seemed to reverberate through the still house. I lifted the lid. The faint scent of old leather and ozone greeted me. There were no photo albums inside, No faded letters or knitted sweaters. The contents were a map of the man I used to be. Neat, color-coded files, their labels a cryptic shorthand only I understood. A slim, hardened case containing 3 encrypted solid-state drives, their surfaces cool and impersonal, and nestled in a custom-cut foam insert, a single, pristine passport. I picked it up. The cover was a deep blue, the emblem of a country I had never truly called home. I flipped it open. The picture was of me, 20 years younger, my hair darker, my eyes holding a flat analytical calm that my son had never seen. The name was not mine, Robert S. Thorne. It was a clean identity, a life preserved in amber, waiting for a day I had hoped would never come. My modest career as a mid-level logistics clerk for a forgettable import-export firm, a carefully constructed fiction, a stage set built to hide the real theater of operations. I wasn't a clerk, I was a strategist, a corporate fixer for a clandestine financial consortium that had no name and left no fingerprints. We didn't deal in threats or violence. That was for thugs and amateurs. It was messy and left evidence. My specialty was a far more elegant and far more permanent form of demolition, psychological warfare and strategic asset liquidation. I was an architect of ruin. I didn't break knees, I broke wills. I didn't burn buildings, I burned reputations to the ground. My weapon was information, and my target was always the same, the foundational weakness of every overly ambitious man: greed, and its more dangerous twin, arrogance. I understood how to find the single hairline fracture in a seemingly impregnable corporate empire and apply precisely the right amount of pressure to make the entire structure shatter. I knew how to turn a CEO's own boasts against him, how to use his hunger for more against the very foundations of what he already had. And as I sat there on the dusty attic floor, the cold of the metal chest seeping into my bones, I saw my son's world with a terrifying crystalline clarity. His entire life, the penthouse, the bespoke suites, the sycophantic investors, the multi-million-dollar deal he bragged about over Christmas dinner, it was all a house of cards. A flimsy construction built on leveraged debt, coerced partnerships, and fraudulent valuations. It was the kind of shaky, arrogant edifice I had spent 4 decades learning how to dismantle with surgical precision. He had built his kingdom on sand, and he was too busy admiring the view to notice the tide I represented. My gaze fell upon a small folded piece of paper I had tucked into the lid of the chest. It was a photo I'd taken with a long-lens camera from a distance, months ago. Elena sitting alone on their vast terrace, a cup of coffee cooling in her hands, staring out at a city she couldn't enjoy. The resignation on her face was a language I understood fluently. It was the look of a spirit being systematically erased. And that's when it happened, the shift. It wasn't a surge of anger, though the anger was there, a cold, deep river running beneath everything. It wasn't a thirst for revenge, though the desire to see his smugness wiped away was a potent temptation. It was something cleaner, something more profound. Looking at Eleanor's face and then back at the tools of my former life, the plan didn't just form, it crystallized. This wasn't about punishing my son, this was about reclamation. It was about reclaiming the dignity he had stolen from her. It was about reclaiming the safety and future he was trying to steal from me by pushing me into some sterile retirement community. It was about reclaiming the very definition of strength from his twisted, loud and brutish understanding of it. He saw my quiet life as uselessness. He was about to learn that the most dangerous weapon is the one you never see coming. The lion had been silent for a long time. It was time to remind the arrogant young cub what a real predator looked like. The silence in my house was no longer empty. It was charged, humming with a purpose I hadn't felt in over a decade. The click in my mind had shifted everything. My son saw a useless old man puttering in his garden. He had no idea he was looking at a dormant strategist, a ghost from a world he couldn't even comprehend. And now the ghost was waking up. The first phase was intelligence. It's the foundation of any successful operation. You don't move until you know the landscape better than your target knows it himself. I went up to the attic, the dust motes dancing in the slanted light. The locked chest wasn't filled with sentimental junk. The key turned with a satisfying heavy clunk. Inside, nestled in custom foam, were the tools of my former trade. Not weapons of steel, but weapons of information. A sleek, hardened laptop, air-gapped and never connected to the internet in this house. A handful of encrypted satellite phones, their batteries still holding a charge, and a small black book filled with sequences of numbers. Not phone numbers, but access codes and protocols. I made a single secure call on one of those phones. A voice answered on the second ring, no greeting necessary. "It's been a long time." "Not long enough," I replied, my voice falling back into the old flat cadence of business. "I need a deep dive. Subject: Mark's enterprise. Everything. The public shell and the private rot." The work began. For days I lived in the glow of that screen, my fingers flying across the keyboard with a muscle memory that surprised even me. I wasn't a retired father. I was a surgeon operating on the digital corpse of my son's ambition. And what a deceased corpse it was. The multi-million-dollar deal he'd boasted about was a house of cards. I found the coerced partners, small business owners he'd strong-armed into unfavorable terms with threats and fabricated legal pressure. I uncovered the hidden debts, layers of leverage he'd taken out against projected revenues that would never materialize. The most egregious was the fraudulent valuation of his flagship asset, a tech startup. He'd inflated its user numbers by an order of magnitude, creating a Potemkin village of success to attract further investment. It was a textbook case of arrogance outpacing intelligence. He thought he was a titan. He was just a conman in a better suit. Simultaneously, I turned my focus inward, to his home. Using methods I'd rather not detail, I accessed the security system of his penthouse. It wasn't for voyeurism. It was for evidence. I compiled audio clips, not of grand arguments, but of the quiet, corrosive disdain. Him criticizing Eleanor's choice of wine for his guests. Him dismissing her suggestion about a charity event. The cold, transactional way he discussed her allowance, her upkeep. I cross-referenced this with the financial records I pulled, tracing how he had systematically isolated her, making her financially dependent while simultaneously belittling that dependency. He had built a beautiful cage for her, and I was gathering the blueprints. Armed with this dossier of his professional and personal failings, I moved to phase 2, the approach. I couldn't do this alone. I needed an inside agent, and Eleanor was the only candidate. I chose a location with care, a bustling botanical garden on a Tuesday morning. Plenty of people for anonymity, enough open space to ensure we weren't overheard. She arrived, looking pale and nervous, her eyes darting around as if expecting Mark to appear at any moment. I didn't offer pleasantries. I slid a tablet across the wrought iron table. On it was a summary document, a curated selection of the evidence. "Read it," I said, my voice quiet but firm. She did. I watched her face as she scrolled, the initial confusion, the dawning horror, the flash of anger as she read the transcripts of his private words to her. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wide with a mixture of fear and something else, a desperate hope. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's the truth," I said, "and it's an exit strategy." I didn't beg. I didn't appeal to her sense of family or justice. I presented a business proposition. I showed her the plan, how we could secure her freedom, both personal and financial. Then I gave her just enough. Mark thinks my life has been one of quiet failure. It hasn't. I spent 40 years in the shadows of high finance, not as an investor, but as a problem solver. I specialized in understanding the flaws in complex systems and in the men who built them. Your husband is a very flawed man, and I know exactly how his system breaks. I saw it then, the moment the spark caught. It wasn't a roaring flame of vengeance, but a steady, determined glow of defiance in her eyes. The same look I'd seen die on New Year's Eve was now rekindled. "He thinks we are useless," I said, holding her gaze. "Let's show him what useless people can do." For the next 2 weeks, we became a silent, efficient machine. Phase 3 was execution. Elena, from the inside, provided me with real-time access to schedules, passwords, and the minute, unguarded details of Mark's daily life. She was the eyes and ears. I, from the quiet of my study, was the brain and the hands. The collapse was engineered to be a cascade, a single domino triggering an unstoppable chain reaction. On a predetermined morning, I initiated the sequence. A comprehensive, anonymized packet of evidence, the fraudulent valuations, the records of coerced partnerships, the hidden debt structures, was delivered electronically to a specific and very motivated contact at the SEC. Minutes later, a synchronized data dump was leaked to 2 financial journalists known for their tenacity. While those bombs were landing in the public sphere, I began making calls. One by one, I contacted every partner Mark had squeezed, every small business owner he'd threatened. I didn't identify myself. I simply informed them that the entity known as Mark's Enterprise was, as of that morning, functionally terminally ill. I provided them with the specific legal and financial avenues to immediately file claims and recoup their losses, offering them a coordinated path to salvation that would, in turn, accelerate the feeding frenzy. The final, most delicate operation was the financial extraction. Using a series of offshore trusts and shell corporations I had established years ago for just such a contingency, structures so layered and quiet they were effectively invisible, we began moving assets. We secured every penny of Elena's personal inheritance and family money he had tried to absorb. Then we targeted the liquid marital assets, cash reserves, brokerage accounts, the kind of wealth Mark thought was his alone to command. We moved with surgical precision, siphoning it away into the shielded trusts. He was so arrogant, so convinced of his own financial genius, that he never noticed the slow, deliberate bleeding. He was a man about to be diagnosed with financial stage 4 cancer, and we were quietly moving his health insurance policy into our name. When it was done, the digital and financial battlefield was set. The traps were armed. All that was left was for my son to take his next arrogant step and trigger the ruin we had so carefully laid at his feet. The sound of the key in the lock was a frantic, scraping thing, a perfect echo of the chaos that had clearly been chasing him all day. The door slammed open, hitting the wall with a crack that spoke of a force born from panic, not strength. And there he was, my son, Mark. His suit, always his armor, was disheveled, his tie loose, his hair a mess from where he'd no doubt been running his hands through it. His face was a blotchy, furious red, his eyes wide and wild, darting around the opulent living room as if the walls themselves were about to testify against him. His phone was still buzzing in his hand, a persistent, angry insect he couldn't swat. He'd been ignoring it, or trying to, but the vibration seemed to travel up his arm and shake his entire body. He finally saw us. Elena, standing poised and calm by the fireplace, her own small suitcase at her feet. And me, seated in the armchair I usually occupied as a piece of forgotten furniture, my own single, worn bag resting beside it. For a second he just stared, his brain trying to process the tableau. The packed bags, our postures, the sheer unnatural calm in a space that should have been a refuge from the storm we had unleashed upon him. The confusion on his face was almost comical, a brief flicker before it was incinerated by a wave of pure, undiluted rage. He took a stumbling step forward, pointing a trembling finger first at Eleanor, then at me. "You," he spat, the word venomous. "What is this? What did you do?" He was looking at me, of course. He always looked at me when things went wrong. I was the easy target, the familiar scapegoat. I said nothing. I just watched him, the way I'd watched markets crash and empires teeter. I observed the tremor in his hand, the sheen of sweat on his forehead, the way his chest heaved. Data points. My silence infuriated him further. It always did. He took another step, his voice rising to a scream that was half fury, half terror. "What did you do? You useless old man, you pathetic—" That's when I moved. It wasn't a large movement. I didn't stand. I didn't shout. I simply raised my hand, palm out, a gesture so simple and so utterly commanding that it sliced his tirade in half. The room went dead quiet, save for the frantic buzzing of his phone. And then I spoke. My voice was not the soft, yielding tone he had known all his life. It was different. It was flat, calm, and cold. It was the voice of a man reading a balance sheet that showed catastrophic loss. It was the voice I had used in soundproofed rooms on the other side of the world a lifetime ago. "You built your house on sand, Mark." The words landed in the silence like stones. He blinked, his mouth still slightly agape. "You confused quiet for weakness." I let that hang there for a moment, letting him feel the weight of his own miscalculation. "You thought my silence was emptiness. You thought my patience was frailty. You were wrong." I leaned forward, just a fraction, my eyes locking with his. For the first time, I wasn't looking at my son. I was looking at a target, an asset that had become a liability. "I spent 40 years, I said, each word precise and measured, understanding the architecture of men like you. I studied their blueprints. I knew every load-bearing beam of their ego, every faulty wire of their ambition. Your particular flaw, Mark, was always arrogance. It's a structural weakness, and it is a flaw I know exactly how to exploit." I reached down to the small side table next to my chair and picked up a single plain manila envelope. I held it out to him. He didn't move. He was paralyzed, staring at me as if I had just removed a mask he never knew I was wearing. The man he thought was a simple, retired nobody was gone, and in his place was a stranger with ice in his veins and a terrifying clarity in his eyes. "This," I said, my arm still extended, "is a copy of the divorce filing. It includes extensive documentation of financial control and emotional abuse. It is, I am told, quite compelling." I could see the blood draining from his face, a slow, sickening retreat that left his skin a pale, waxy grey. "Accompanying it," I continued, my voice never wavering, "is a summary of the financial restructuring Elena and I have executed over the last 2 weeks. The hidden accounts you thought were yours? They're not. The liquid assets you boasted about? They've been moved into a series of shielded trusts. The whistleblower packages to the SEC and the coordinated leaks to your former partners were simply the final triggers." I took a slow, deliberate breath, ensuring my next sentence would be the last one he ever heard from me as my son. "Your wife is no longer your asset, and I am no longer your father." I let go of the envelope. It fluttered to the polished floor between us, a silent, final judgment. He didn't look down at it. He couldn't. His eyes were fixed on me, wide with a dawning, horrific understanding. He was finally seeing me. Not the ghost he dismissed at Christmas dinner, not the simpleton he wanted to put in a home, but the architect. The quiet man in the corner who had been reading the blueprints of his life all along, and who had just quietly, methodically, pulled out the one keystone that would bring the whole arrogant, gilded structure crashing down around him. The color did not return to his face. He just stood there, hollowed out, staring at the ruin of his life and finally seeing the man who had built it. The silence in the penthouse was heavier than any sound. It was the silence of a collapsed star, dense and absolute. Mark didn't move from the spot where we'd left him, standing there in the middle of his $10 million living room, the envelope I'd given him lying at his feet like a fallen leaf. He was a statue of a man who had just watched his own reflection shatter. There were no more words to be said. The ones I had spoken, cold, precise, and final, had done their work. They were the last nails in a coffin he had spent years building for himself. Elena picked up her single elegant suitcase. I picked up my own worn, practical duffel. We didn't look at each other. We didn't need to. Our movements were synchronized, the product of 2 weeks of meticulous, secret planning. This wasn't a frantic escape. It was an extraction, a clinical, professional disengagement from a toxic asset. We walked towards the elevator, our footsteps silent on the plush carpet. I didn't glance back at my son. The man I had known as my son was already gone, replaced by a lesson I never wanted to teach. The elevator doors slid open, we stepped inside, and they closed, severing us from that life with a soft, definitive sigh. Down in the garage, a nondescript black sedan was waiting, its engine already purring. The driver, a man I had worked with on 3 continents in another lifetime, gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. We got in. As the car pulled out into the city night, the penthouse tower shrank in the rear window, just another glittering needle in a skyline of ambition and ruin. Elena finally let out a breath, a long, slow exhalation that seemed to carry the weight of years. She didn't cry. She just stared out the window, watching the city lights blur past, a prisoner watching the walls of her jail recede into the distance. We didn't speak during the drive. There was no need for recrimination or relief, not yet. The mission was still in progress. We were in the transition phase, the most vulnerable part of any operation. My mind was a checklist: secure the principles, reach the extraction point, execute the next phase. The part of me that had been a father, a quiet man in a garden, was compartmentalized, locked away in a mental vault. The part that had spent 4 decades as a strategist, a ghost in the machine of high-stakes finance, was in full command. The car didn't take us to the commercial airport with its crowds and security cameras. It glided onto a private access road leading to a small, quiet airfield used by corporations and individuals who value discretion above all else. The plane was waiting on the tarmac, a sleek, unmarked jet, its stairs down like an invitation. There were no frantic goodbyes, no tense waits at a gate. This was the difference between running and leaving. We were not fugitives, we were architects moving to the next site. We boarded the plane. The interior was calm, luxurious in an understated way. A flight attendant, calm, professional, asking no questions, offered us water or coffee. We declined. Elena took a seat by a window, and I sat across the aisle from her. As the engine spooled up with a low whine, I allowed myself one last look at the city I was leaving, not with nostalgia, but with a detached assessment of a commander leaving a battlefield. The objectives had been met. The target had been neutralized. The plane began to taxi, then accelerate, and with a gentle lifting pressure, we were airborne. The city became a grid of twinkling lights, then a smudge, then nothing but the dark landscape of the country I had called home for 60 years. I turned away from the window. Elena had closed her eyes, but I could see the tension in her shoulders beginning to ease, muscle by muscle. The funds we had secured, the money Mark never knew existed, the money he thought was his to control, were already waiting for us, woven into a complex, shielded web of trusts and accounts, in a quiet, secure European nation known for its stability and its strong extradition treaties. We weren't hiding from the law, we were placing ourselves beyond his reach in a fortress of our own making. The flight attendant dimmed the cabin lights. In the soft gloom, the hum of the jet engines was a lullaby of distance, putting miles and a new reality between us and the ruin we had left behind. The plan was complete, the extraction was successful, and for the first time in a very, very long time, the silence felt not like a weapon, but like peace. The sun here feels different. It doesn't just illuminate, it absolves. It warms the stone of the terrace and coaxes the scent from the rosemary bushes I've planted, a scent that now means peace, not escape. This garden, high on a Mediterranean cliffside where the sea is a constant breathing presence below, is a place of cultivation, not hiding. I tend to it each morning, my hands in the earth, but the action is no longer a retreat into simplicity. It is a choice, a deliberate daily affirmation of the life I have reclaimed. The house behind me, a villa of clean, white lines and deep-set windows, is not a fortress. It is a home. Its doors are open to the salt-tinged breeze, and the silence within is a comfortable one, filled with the potential of a new day, not the heavy weight of a buried past. Elena is the heart of this new silence. I see her now, walking from the house with a sketchbook under her arm, her hair catching the light. The change in her is the most profound victory of all. The tired, sad ghost who used to stare at her plate is gone. In her place is a woman of disarming vitality. She paints. She has started a small online gallery to showcase the work of local artists, a project that consumes her with a passion I never saw in all the years she was draped in Mark's expensive, suffocating world. The resources we secured, the funds he never knew existed and thought were entirely his, are not a fortune to be hoarded. They are tools. For her, they are the freedom to finally have a voice. For me, they are the means to ensure our peace is permanent. Our relationship is the quiet cornerstone of this new existence. It is a partnership, a word I use with its full weight. There is no ownership here, no sense that one of us is responsible for the other. We are two people who were deemed useless by the same man, who found in each other the resolve to become something else entirely. We share meals on the terrace, discussing her projects or the book I'm finally reading for pleasure. There is respect in the space between our words, a mutual understanding forged in the crucible of his arrogance. Occasionally, news filters through the secure channels I maintain, a habit from a former life that now serves a new one. We hear that the Cascade we triggered was absolute. Mark's company, that monument to his ego, was dissolved. The assets he boasted about were liquidated piece by piece to pay the staggering fines and settlements. The partners he strong-armed were made whole, a point of particular satisfaction for me. It wasn't just about breaking his empire, it was about restoring a measure of balance. The last report was the most poetic. He is, by all accounts, a nobody. He lives in a rented apartment, a ghost in the city where he once strutted like a king. The world he built on sand has been washed away, leaving him precisely where he once accused me of being, invisible, insignificant, and utterly alone. The irony is not lost on me. He sought to make me useless, and in doing so, he unlocked a version of myself I had put to rest decades ago. He tried to frame Elena as a decorative object, and she has become an architect of her own destiny. Here, in this sun-drenched corner of the world, we have found a purpose that is entirely our own. It is not loud or boastful. It is in the taste of fresh olives from our own trees, in the splash of color on Elena's canvas, in the deep, unshakable quiet of a night sky unpolluted by city lights. This is the aftermath, not a frantic escape but a graceful arrival. The war is over, and we are not just the survivors. We are the ones who have found a better country on the other side of the battle, a place where the words useless and nobody have lost all meaning, washed clean by the sea air and the simple, powerful truth of our freedom. My son called me the most useless man in the world. He said it to my face across a table laden with the evidence of his own success, the crystal and the silver, and the wine that cost more than my first car. He laughed when he said it, as if it were a joke, but we both knew it was the one truth he held in his heart. He looked at my simple clothes, at my quiet life, at the gentle way I tended my garden, and he saw a lamb. He saw docility. He saw an end. He never saw the lion. He never understood that the silence he mocked was not emptiness, but a deep, still pool of observation. For 40 years, my career was not in ledgers or meetings he would recognize. It was in the shadows of boardrooms and the quiet spaces between contracts. I was a strategist, a ghost in the machine of high finance. My specialty was not creation but deconstruction. I learned to study men, to find the single fragile thread that, when pulled, would make the entire tapestry of their ego and ambition unravel into nothing. I learned that the loudest man in the room is usually the most frightened, and the most arrogant is always the most blind. My son was the most arrogant man I have ever known. He believed respect was something you could demand, something you could purchase with a penthouse or a business deal built on the broken backs of others. He thought strength was in the volume of his voice, in the force of his will, in the public humiliation of those he deemed beneath him. He was wrong, so profoundly, catastrophically wrong. True strength is not about making noise. Noise is a distraction. True strength is the predator's stillness in the long grass. It is the patience to watch, to wait, to understand every habit, every weakness, every unguarded moment. It is the discipline to do nothing until the perfect moment arrives, and then to act with a precision that is almost beautiful in its finality. It is moving the pieces on the board so quietly that your opponent doesn't even know the game has begun until he looks down and sees his king is already in checkmate. That is what I did. I did not rage, I did not argue. I absorbed his insults like the earth absorbs the rain. I let him believe his own fiction, that I was a simple, broken old man waiting for the end. And all the while I was learning. I was mapping the architecture of his pride, finding the cracks in the foundation of his empire. I saw his cruelty not just to me, but to his wife, a good woman whose light he was systematically extinguishing. And in that, I found my purpose. It was no longer just about enduring an insult. It was about a reclamation. It was about freeing a soul he believed he owned. When we finally acted, Elena and I, it was not an explosion. It was a series of silent, calculated moves. A leaked document here, a whispered phone call there, a transfer of assets he never knew were vulnerable. We did not break his knees. We broke the illusion of his invincibility. We showed him that the world he built was a house of cards, and we were simply the gust of wind he never saw coming. His collapse was not a battle. It was a foregone conclusion. He was in a war he didn't know was being fought, against an enemy he had dismissed as useless, and he lost everything before he even knew he was under attack. So remember this, remember my story. When you meet a quiet man, a man who seems content in his simplicity, do not be so quick to judge. Do not mistake his silence for weakness. Do not confuse his calm for surrender. That man may be the most dangerous person you will ever encounter. He has nothing to prove to you. He is not performing. He is assessing. And if you, in your arrogance, threaten what he holds dear, he will not shout or threaten you in return. He will simply go home, open a locked chest, and begin the quiet, meticulous work of dismantling your entire world. Never underestimate the quiet man. He's often the most dangerous one in the room.